And I think we can kind of go ahead and get started. Hopefully, I see some folks maybe still filtering in, but hopefully they can kind of catch up. So welcome to our latest installment of the Iowa OER webinar series. This is kind of a busy week for Open Ed. I don't know how many of you are actually attending the Open Ed conference this week, but there's that going on and a couple other library conferences. So I really appreciate everybody, making time to listen to this webinar in light of all the other things that are going on today. So I would like to just let people know that if you have topics of interest relating to OER that you'd like to hear talked about in greater detail, or if you have a particular speaker or someone who you'd like to hear from, feel free to drop us a line. Our Iowa OER email and our Google group and our website and our YouTube channel. I'll post all the links to that in the chat once we get started here. But if you have ideas that you would like to hear more about, you can always feel free to send a message to the listserv or to an email to OER Iowa, and that will help us kind of build out our roster for these webinars in the future. My name is Mariah Burnett. I'm the Scholarly Communications Librarian at University of Iowa. And I'm joined today by Abbey Elder, who is the Open Access and Scholarly Communication Librarian at Iowa State. Abbey has titled this talk, Growing an OER Initiative, and indeed she'll be discussing her work building Iowa State's OER Initiative. The topics covered will include starting an OER committee, working with stakeholders, and developing programs on campus. In addition to these topics, Abbey will also share tips, tricks, and resources that can help you get your OER initiative running. No matter how much funding or support you have on campus right now, these tips can help you get started. So we're going to keep the microphones muted. If you have questions during Abbey's talk, just feel free to drop them in the chat, or we'll also save some time at the end for discussion and questions. So you can always hold your questions till the end too. As I mentioned, the whole session will be recorded and shared out on the OER Action Team's website, as well as our YouTube channel. And I'll drop the links to all those things in the chat. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Abbey.
There you go. Now that I'm unmuted, hopefully everyone can hear me. I always have to start with that. And yes, okay. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Abbey Elder. I'm the Open Access and Scholarly Communication Librarian for Iowa State University, as Mariah said. And if you attended my North Dakota presentation earlier this week, I'll say please feel free to skip this one because I'll be covering a lot of the same information. But if this is the first time you're tuning in, then feel free to stick around and listen to what I have to say. Today, like Mariah said, again, I'll be talking a little bit about starting your own OER initiative, what it takes to do that, and I'll also be sharing some examples from Iowa State and how we started our own program. But to start with, I'm going to do just a little bit of background for those of you who aren't well acquainted with open educational resources. So what are OER? Open educational resources are teaching resources that are free of cost and access barriers and which also carry legal permissions for open use. In other words, they're any sort of educational materials from textbooks to syllabi and everything in between, which are free to access and have legal permissions for open use and reuse by others. In other words, there's two main components, the freedom to access and the freedom to reuse. So open can be seen as two very similar things, free plus permissions. These permissions are usually referred to as the 5 R's. It's a concept come up with by David Wiley in 2013, one of the sort of heads of the open education movement. And these includes the rights to retain or own your own copy of a content, revise or make second editions or edit copies, remix or take multiple open resources and create something new, reuse things in different circumstances, or redistribute them, which is just sharing something that already exists. So now that you have a very short basis of what an open educational resource is, why would you start an open educational resource initiative on your campus? Well, the first and most obvious reason is for our students. Textbook costs over the last 30 years have become completely unsustainable, and they've been rising at an incredible rate. This has caused a lot of issues for students, especially those who come from low-income backgrounds or who are first-generation students. Largely because these students are the ones who aren't prepared for the costs of college. A lot of the time when you come to college, your teachers and your professors and your parents will say, this is what you need to prepare for. But if you're at a school that isn't used to all of your students immediately going on to a university, or if your parents didn't go to university, they aren't going to be able to tell you In addition to fees and tuition, you have to adjust for $300 to $600 worth of textbooks each semester. So suddenly they're hit with these costs that they're not prepared to handle. And those costs can impact students' grades, their retention in school, and food security and homelessness, which is a surprising but very present problem in United States colleges today. It affects grades because students who aren't able to buy their books on the first day of class won't be able to actually use them to learn or to do their homework if homework systems are bundled in with those textbooks. It affects retention because students who can't do well in their courses because they can't afford the materials might just feel like college isn't for them. And affects their food security because sometimes students do have to make the choice between buying groceries at the beginning of the semester or getting the books they need to succeed. And these are all things that contribute to an inequitable environment for our students. So having an official OER initiative on your campus is like saying, we care about the affordability of our students' education. We will support instructors interested in pursuing open education and open educational practices, and we're not asking you to do this work alone. In other words, having an official initiative shows that you're actually putting something behind the work that you're asking people to do. A lot of the times when we're starting out with open education, we'll ask people to do things, we'll say that we support them, but without some sort of committee backing, programming, or other support systems, then it's empty words. It's something that we can ask faculty to do, but they're not going to have any help to actually do that work. And that can be incredibly off-putting for people who are having to put in work to find these materials to help their classes, especially in the middle of a pandemic that's already putting so much extra on their workloads. So what's my experience starting an OER initiative at Iowa State University? How did I get here, basically? Well, we started off our initiative with just using what we already had on hand. In other words, we were very lucky and we had a few things that were already on our side. So rather than trying to look at what other people had and mimic those from the very first day, we took stock of what we had on campus and used that to build our initiative. First, we had brand new support staff who could work on OER, me. Second, we had a supportive bookstore that cared about affordability on campus and knew what OER was. That was a really big boon for us because Iowa State does have a university-owned bookstore, so we're able to partner with them a little bit better than commercial bookstores would. And finally, we had a student government president that was knowledgeable about and interested in OER. He was really the backing to get our initiative started because he'd gone to a few statewide and national conferences where student government leaders were talking about open education. So he came forward and asked us to start this work, and shortly after, I was hired to get things really moving. And the first thing we did was just make a committee. The committee was a grassroots team of just 5 people, made up largely of library and bookstore representatives. There was me, my supervisor, supervisor, a bookstore manager, and the student government president. And that was about it. But we came together on a monthly basis and talked through different things that we could do on campus, workshops, panels, ways that we could encourage people to continue to learn more about OER or use them, and ways we could feature faculty that were already using open educational resources on campus. Over the last 3 years, this committee has grown, and now it's a group of 13 members from across campus, including a position in student government that is dedicated to affordability, so that anyone in student government that gets that position is automatically on our committee each year. That's especially useful since we can't count on someone being interested among the student body with so much turnover each year. We've also got members from financial aid, the Dean of Students office, the bookstore again still, and others on campus, including digital accessibility, which has been a huge boon. But that growth wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the work that we started out doing at the very beginning. The very first thing that we did was we found the early adopters. I will say right now, if you think that there is no one on your campus using OER, you are probably wrong. There might be people using open textbooks that don't even know that that's what it is. The very first professor we found that was using OER on campus was using the American Yop and US History textbook in her courses, and she just thought it was a free textbook that was online. She didn't realize that it was an open educational resource or that that was even a thing. So after talking to her and getting her to do a few panels talking about why she uses this resource, it became clear that it's not because it's open, it's because it's free, and it's because it's the best textbook she could find in the field. The nice thing about that is that it's It's regularly updated by a group of experts, and it's able to keep up with how fast things change in history, and especially modern US history. Besides just finding those early adopters, we were also able to run workshops and provide incentives for people to get excited about this work. We joined the Open Education Network before the whole statewide group did, and had them come to our campus when that was still a possibility. And we surveyed the community about their interest in services. What do you want to see? What do you want to learn about? And the two biggest things we saw were people wanted help finding OER, and people wanted help just getting this work done. They wanted actual hands-on support for this work. And so I developed some consultations for the people to help them locate resources and more. I'll talk a little bit more about those later. And we grew our presence. The biggest way that we were able to grow our initiative on campus was through our student government OER resolution, annual presentations to student government, because again, they have a lot of turnover. You have to continually talk to them to make sure they remember that we exist and that this is still something happening on campus. We received an official charge from the provost for our committee's continual work, and we had crossover support from other affordability initiatives on campus, like course reserves in our immediate access program. That student government resolution was the biggest piece, though, because it showed that there was a lot of interest among the student body for not only more use of OER on campus, but acknowledgement of the professors doing the work. They asked that professors have some sort of letter sent to their departments to say thank you, that they could include these in their tenure and promotion packets. And although that hasn't gotten much farther yet, it's definitely something we want to pursue further. And finally, we got an actual grants program to literally incentivize people to work on OER. I know this isn't possible for everyone out there, but we were able to get some funding through the provost, our Center for Learning and Teaching, and the library through in-kind support. Basically, the library said, we will put in $5,000 for this. Can we get $5,000 from you? And that's really just how this started. This grants program has an emphasis on innovation and experimentation in the classroom. We don't ask people to just make a textbook. We say, what would work best for you? And then people create things that work in a lot of different ways. This year, many people are making video tutorials. Last year, a lot of people made interactive materials. And the year before that, it was a lot of textbooks and handbooks, actually, because it was early on and people were still finding their footing with it. But it's helped us a lot in encouraging more use and interest in OER on campus. So if you're just starting out, how can you put some of these tips to good use? Well, there's some things I didn't mention in my own story that I'd like to encourage you to do yourself. The first is an environmental scan. The second is seeking stakeholder support. And finally, building your own team. The first thing you should think about is running an environmental scan. And I know that that is a big term. It's something that has a lot of weight behind it and you might be a little scared by. But environmental scans do not have to be some big fancy endeavor. They can be something as simple as self-reflection on what's possible for your campus. A lot of the time when I talk to people about this, I'll use the usual business example of a SWOT analysis, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And that, again, does not have to be a big fancy process. It can be as simple as looking at your campus and what you have available to you. Do you have a student government that's interested in OER? Do you have a bookstore that might be interested in partnering with you? What sort of programs do you already have that could be used to support an OER program? And do you have anything already in place, early adopters or supportive people that you can leverage as your initiative gets started? Think through that and think what could work for you. Here's a few different ways that you could run a quote unquote environmental scan. The first is self-reflection. Again, just running through a checklist in your head of what you have available and how you can utilize it. The second is student surveys, which is obviously asking your student body, how much do you know about OER and how interested are you in it? The third is internal reviews, which is actually reaching out to people and getting a review of what's happening on campus and how can you support people more, like us asking faculty what sort of services did they want to see on campus. And finally, actually full reports, going out and doing the legwork to ask people what's next for this initiative. But that self-reflection bit is often the easiest and the place that I'd say to start. Those later things you can get into once you have something on the ground already to build off of. Second, you should oh boy, this is a tongue twister. Seek stakeholder support. Stakeholders are really just anyone who has a stake in the work that you're doing. If you're not used to that term, that's okay, but seeking stakeholders is not a difficult thing. It's really just reaching out to your community and figuring out how they can help you. This includes instructors, students, administrators, and any staff who might be able to work with you or who need to be involved in your work. So for the first half of that, I'd say people who can help you might be instructional designers, people that work in the Department of Online Learning, who you can leverage as you're getting things started. And people who need to be involved might include like the bookstore or those who report textbook adoptions for the HEOA requirements. I believe that's what it is. But that way you can make sure that any open educational resources that are adopted in place of a textbook are actually reported and able to be tracked on campus. So how do you talk to these different stakeholder groups? Tips for talking to instructors include, first, starting where it's easy. I'm always going to include that in these presentations. Do not go out and seek out the people that you know are adversarial to your work already. Start with the people that you know might be amenable, where there might be a couple of faculty already using OER in their classes, and ask them what they think you should do next. If they're interested in partnering with you, or if there's a place where you could help support them better in their work. Advertise existing support. If there's anything you're already doing that could be useful, make sure that faculty and other instructors know that that is available, because more than anything else, they want to know that you can help them and how you can. Give clear examples of how they can get started. Do not just say to people, oh, go use an OER. Tell them how to find them, how you can help them find them, and what it might take to integrate an open textbook or other OER into their coursework. And acknowledge that this is work. A lot of the time, people will come into this and again, just be gung-ho about open education. They'll say, this is so exciting, why isn't everyone doing this? But again, we're very busy. Time is a very difficult to come by commodity this year, and you need to acknowledge that finding and integrating coursework into a course that's completely new is going to take time and effort that faculty might not have. Supporting them and acknowledging that this might take time is a good thing. And finally, don't demonize publishers or faculty choice. Just because someone is using a textbook in their course that costs $100, $200, just because there's publishers that might have a bad stigma in the community, that doesn't mean that you should say they're the only problem or they're the ones to blame for everything. Because a lot of the time, this isn't something that can be changed easily. Maybe a faculty member is using just the best book they have available to them. Maybe there are publishers that are working with faculty on their editorial boards. There could be a personal relationship between these people, and you saying that this is the problem is just going to push people away from you, and you don't want to do that. When talking to students, it's even more important to be careful with your wording, because a lot of the times students are going to be the strongest grassroots movement on your campus, but also the hardest to hold back if they get too ahead of themselves. So carefully explain what it is that your initiative is trying to do and what it means. Make sure that they don't jump ahead of you if they think, oh, this means all of my textbooks can be free. Let's go campaign for that right now, because that's not the case. This, again, takes time and effort, and students need to understand that as well. Again, especially provide examples of ways they can help, because they're gonna go out and try to do something. Give them something that they can do that's actually useful and that they can channel those energies toward. Develop a simple marketing campaign to explain to students what OER are and why you're advancing them on campus. And finally, share information at places where new students can learn about this, like orientation and other new student events. And finally, administrators. And obviously, this is going to be the group you might be reaching out to first, especially if you want more top-down support for your program. But when you're talking to administrators, some tips you can bring in are, if you have data, bring it with you. If you have current programs that are already in place, also bring those with you. You want people to know that you're doing this work and exactly what the impacts of it have been so far before you ask for any sort of support, especially if it's funding. Focus on a clear goal that's easy to pitch. You do not want to share with people the 5 things that you could do if you started up an initiative today. You want to share with them the 1 to 2 options of how this could proceed if you had a little bit more backing. And finally, align your goals with existing institutional initiatives. I'm lucky. I work at a land grant institution, so our whole thing is that we have free education and that we try to support the growth of knowledge for everyone in the state. It's very easy to align those goals to open education, but for others, it might be a little bit harder. So look at what the current strategic plan is for your school, if there's some sort of goals or initiatives they're trying to push, and see if there's a way you can fold OER into that to help support administrators in thinking about how this ties into what they're already doing. So this isn't just an extra thing they can support, but part of a bigger plan. And finally, after you've done that whole environmental scan and thought through your strengths and weaknesses and where you can go, after you've talked to people that might be able to support you, build out your team. And again, this is where we sort of started at Iowa State. We had a team because our student government was very proactive. But if you're not sure who to include in this team, ask people. Just go out and say, who should I include? Ask someone who's been on your campus for a long time if you're new. Ask someone who works with a lot of different groups on campus if they might be a good fit. A lot of the time, I will reach out to our Center for Learning and Teaching because they have the most experience working with instructors, working with people who do a lot of coursework and courseware work. They work with Canvas very carefully, so I'm able to help them get in touch with people, and they're able to help me find people that'd be a good fit for our team. As you're building out your team, be considerate of people's time, especially students and faculty. Having a student on your committee can be a great thing, but it also means you have to be more careful about how often you meet and where you meet and at what times, because they have a very busy schedule. They are in the middle of college. Strive for diversity in your team, not just through race and ability, but also through the level that people are in their careers. Don't just have brand new people or people that have been around for 5 to 10 years. Look to administrators, look to managers, look to people that are starting up things brand new, because that's going to help you get more ideas for different ways your initiative could go in the future. And finally, learn from your team and encourage innovation. A lot of the time, especially if you're managing and building up a team like this, it'll be tempting to say, here are the things that everyone has to do, here's your checklists, and pass it out to everyone. But if there's something that someone brings to the table that is new or different and that no one has done before, encourage them to look into it more. Encourage them to see how it might be done on your campus and just to explore that, because it might be something that could change the whole framework of your initiative on campus. Who knows? Now, some common campus partners you might want to pursue include instructors, entire departments, and the faculty senate members, student government, again, because although students generally are your goal to reach out to, student government is going to include people who are a little bit more engaged in getting on official committees on campus, who want to have this sort of thing on their resumes, and they're more in tune with what it takes to get policy developed on the campus as well. The library, I will always say the library, because if you want people to help find information for people, if you want to help people find resources, they're going to be a great team member for you. And also, subject librarians are always a great way to get in touch with departments. The Teaching and Learning Center and instructional designers on campus, whether you have one, the other, or both, get in touch with them as well. Online and blended learning offices, your bookstore, if they are amenable to OER. I know it's a different case for everyone. Accessibility or information technology offices, and financial aid in the Dean of Students. All sort of good places to look to start. And other tips for starting out. So I say this especially as someone who works on the Iowa OER committee and sort of helps get this work together. Enlist support locally, not just on your own campus, but regionally. Reach out to people through our listserv, ask for help getting started, and ask for examples of what other people have done. You do not have to come at this alone. Join listservs and ask for advice, not just our own, but other ones like CCC OER, which is the Community College Consortium for OER, LibOER, which is a library-based OER listserv, The OTN network has a really good listserv, which I'm not sure if you can join. It's one of those weird things. But there are lots of great groups you can join and look into. You can learn from other exemplars around the state and across the United States as well. See what other people are doing and learn from them, but don't be afraid to innovate with your own ideas as well. And finally, don't feel like you have to have all the same pieces to your initiative as everybody else. You might not have the funding to put together a grants initiative, and that's okay. You might not want to have an official committee. Maybe you'd rather have just a working group that does things every now and then and reports out to the wider campus community. Figure out what works for your campus and your community and work with that. You don't have to just copy what I'm doing or what anyone else is doing in the state. So finally, I'm going to go over a couple of project types that you might look into for your own initiative. The first is support locating content. Like I said earlier, this is usually done through consultations, meetings with faculty to talk through what they need for their course and how you can help them find it. This support is often the most important, but also the simplest to put together as long as you can find someone with the time and expertise to do it. There's some tips and tricks I've got here for helping faculty find OER. First is make a template. So a good way to help you get things put together for people is to have a Word document template that says course name, faculty name, keywords or topics related to the course, and then links to textbooks, modules, videos, and other resources. Having that template that you can build off of means that you don't have to, every single time someone comes to you with a new course, build out the same sort of tips and tricks for here's where I found this, here's where I found that. And it also makes it look a little bit more professional than an email with a list of links you found. Second, leverage library guides. If you have looked for OER before, you might be a little bit overwhelmed with all of the repositories and options. But if you search for example, quotes, biology, OER, libguides, then you'll find a lot of guides that people have already curated resources with biology OER that are available. Look at what the librarians have already done instead of trying to pull out everything you can find yourself, and then go from there. And finally, ask for more information when you need it. And specifically, ask the instructors for more information about their class. A lot of the time, it's easy for faculty to say, yeah, I teach a class about calculus. But calculus 1, pre-calculus? Is it an advanced calculus course? Is there a specific angle that you're coming at it from? Is there a way that you teach it? What book do you use? Things like this are the things that you might need to come back at them with if you're not sure where to start looking for content or if something you found is actually related to what they need. Calculus is probably a bad example, but other courses, like, for example, natural resources or forestry, might be more complex for you to find resources for unless you have information about all of the key topics that they cover in that class. Here's an example of an OER consultation description from California State University. Basically, it's just a short explanation of what they can do, a link to request an appointment with the librarian, and you can also fill out a form with information about what your class is and what you need. It's a nice, easy way to just get things started in this work. If you're not sure where to start, or if faculty just need a little bit of extra push to find things, because again, we can't expect them to do all of this work by themselves. After the finding support, we've got professional development. Now, professional development is obviously incredibly important for instructors coming into open education for the first time, because this is not only new materials, but a new way of teaching in some ways. So setting up some sort of workshop or professional development series can help with building a knowledge base across campus. You can also develop static training videos or other ways to help people out, like having a website with basic information. And you can set up more advanced learning communities across campus as well. This can be extremely helpful for building a community of practice among the faculty you have. So here's some pros and cons to different types of professional development. First, there's workshop series and one-offs. This is the easiest one to put together and usually what you'll start with. One-off workshops can be great for a lot of reasons, both because they're easy to schedule As long as you have someone that knows a decent amount about the topic, you can get it together. You can pull in guest speakers like me or Mariah to come talk about these sorts of topics. And these workshop series can cater to both beginners and experienced instructors. One week you can talk about getting started with OER. The next week you can talk about open pedagogy in the classroom. But these sorts of one-off workshops can also be a double-edged sword. It doesn't really build a sense of community. You might have lower enrollment in these courses because there's 5 people coming to the beginner's course and 2 people coming to an advanced one, or people are always busy on Tuesdays, so no one came to your workshop on Tuesday, but everyone came on Wednesday. These sorts of things you can't really plan for. And it can be hard to gauge actual learning across an entire group. You've got so many different faculty you're seeing in different areas that you don't know exactly how things are progressing across campus. In contrast, having an actual faculty learning community can help build a sense of community on campus. It can help people develop more knowledge over time. Often these faculty learning communities come for cohorts over the summer or 5-week workshop series where they continually come back and do readings and talk about what they've learned. It's sort of like a mini course. It's great to build a sense of community among those using OER on campus, but it really requires a lot of time. It requires a lot of people that are excited and interested in this work already. And it also requires you to have staff that can actually support this learning community. And if you don't have that base of understanding already, it can be difficult to get this work started. Finally, faculty learning communities often require monetary rewards or other kinds of acknowledgement that they've done this work, like a certificate for their department, because without that, then it's not really worth the time investment for them to get into this unless they're really, really invested. And that's how you end up with faculty learning communities of 3 people, which can be a good start, but it also takes a lot of time out of your support staff as well. So if you're developing a training program, I would recommend, this is a self-promo, I'd recommend you check out my OER Starter Kit workbook. It is a workbook with a few different chapters on sections like what is OER, what is copyright and open licensing, how do you use open pedagogy in the classroom, and how do you develop open educational resources. I've got a bit.ly link here, so if you want to look that up, you can. But basically, this is a good way to structure a training program or workshop series if you'd like some help with that process. The workbook has 16 worksheets built into it in Google Drive, so you can copy, download, and use them however you'd like. There are 2 to 3 worksheets per chapter. And if you use the book in the built-in system it has, then there's Hypothesis integration. Hypothesis is a collaborative annotation software. So groups of people online can annotate the book in real time on the internet. They can add notes, they can add footnotes, links to other resources that might be useful. It's a good way to sort of get a bigger sense of interactivity and community with faculty in your learning community. It's good for workshop series and individual workshops. Again, you can just download single worksheets if you want to, and it might be a good place to start if you don't really know where to start with your own training. Now let's get into the grant and incentive programs. And I know, again, this isn't going to be perfect for everyone. Not all of you are going to have the funding available, but I will talk about different types of grant and incentive programs you might use on your campus. First, the when, the how, and the why. When should I have an incentive program? Whenever I can. How could you get an incentive program? However you can. And why? To support the growth of OER use on campus, OER development, and to promote an equity of participation in open educational practices. Now, why do I say an equity of participation? A lot of the time, there are some faculty already creating open educational resources on your campus, especially at places like Iowa State and Q Iowa, where people are paid to go out of their way to do research and other scholarship. But there are other instructors that would do this work, would be interested in doing this work, but they don't have the time, they don't have the funding, and there's no incentive for them to do so. Giving them that support can help get their voices heard in a way that they might not have been supported in the past. So that can help not only diversify the voices creating these OER, but the types of resources we're getting out of it. So what are some types of incentives you might have? The first and easiest is compensation for reviews or training programs. A small stipend for people to say, thank you for reviewing this open textbook. We appreciate that you went through the time to look and see if it would be good for your course. If you choose to adopt it, let us know. Or thank you for attending our training program and taking the time to spend time with us and learn more about this. We hope that you'll look into OER further. From there, there's small grants for OER adoption. This is less common now than it used to be. There used to be a lot of colleges doing just, hey, thank you for adopting OER, here's some money. That's a lot harder to come by now because funding is tight, so less people do that. Then there's competitive grants for OER adaptation and creation. The University of Iowa and Iowa State both have grants like this right now. Really, it's a good way to support people who have an idea for something they already want to do or have a base to work with. The reason they're competitive is because there is an application process that requires review of those grants and to see if the proposals actually make sense and if it looks like the faculty member knows what they're doing and have the support to do it. And then there's course release for OER development, which is the least common, but probably the most impactful type of incentive you could have, which is why it's the hardest to get. But course release is the best way to give faculty members the time they need and the support they need to actually develop an open educational resource. Because if they don't have to be teaching at the exact same time they're writing a textbook, that actually gives them the mental space to get that work done. But aside from those monetary incentives, there's also systemic incentives you could look into, like acknowledging OER in the tenure and promotion process, marking free and open content in your course schedule so faculty can see that this is something that's being acknowledged and not just something that they're doing out of the goodness of their own hearts. It's also a way that students can see that, oh, this is a free textbook in this class, I'm gonna jump into that. And then there's annual awards or features for OER champions on campus. So here at Iowa State, we have our OER trailblazers that we acknowledge, and we send out awards through student government at the end of the spring saying, thank you for using an open textbook this year. Here's a nice little plaque to show off to all your friends. There are a lot of different ways that you can have systemic incentives, but the important thing is that faculty know their work is valued and that them putting in the time to find and use these resources is not being done without any sort of acknowledgement. I feel like I've been saying that a lot this time, but it is something extremely important for this work that you support the people doing the hard part of it, because the faculty are the ones that are having to put this into practice. We're just the ones who have to help them get there. If you'd like some more help looking into programs and how to get started with them on your campus, I do have a worksheet here that you can download and use at your own time. It's bit.ly/OER projects. Basically, the worksheet walks you through the sort of examples that I've gone through already. First, it asks you to look at what other institutions are doing. What sort of programs do they have on their campus? Then identify exemplars. So who do you think is the coolest thing? What do you want to do the most on your own campus? What speaks to you? Then assessing your own institution. How could you actually do that project? What sort of things would you have to get to make that program a reality? Or how could you change the program that they've done to make it work for your own institution? And then reflect on what you need to do next. Basically, it's a starter guide to getting some program brainstorming done. So now that I've gone through the basics of my own institutional program and how we got started, what questions do you have for me? You can put them in the chat or raise your hand, I assume.
Does anybody have any questions? You can also unmute your mic too and just give them verbally too if you like. Well, I have a question just to kind of get us started, Abby. So you talked a lot about supports that, you know, people in this kind of, you know, initiative development space offer to faculty. Are there any supports that you've had to provide that you really weren't anticipating or that were sort of surprising to you?
The one that I wasn't expecting to need the most, but that we did need was Canvas support. So a lot of people just not knowing how to link to things effectively online and to make sure students know what they are. So we've actually provided some example language of how to say, this is where your course textbook is. It's an open textbook. That means it's free. Here's different ways you can download it and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a good one. I've kind of struggled with that too. Like there's been a lot of questions about organizing things generally and kind of structuring what's been developed so that it can be more easily used, I guess.
Yeah. I see we have a comment from Kevin as well in the chat. How have you assessed your OER efforts at Iowa State? There's a couple of different ways we've assessed it. The first is through keeping track of people adopting OER on campus. We have a live open survey on our OER website where faculty can fill out to report an adoption. And they also report open textbook adoptions to our bookstore at the beginning of the year. Of course, we miss some people in between, but we'll reach out to folks as well throughout the semester. And through that, we're able to get student enrollment numbers and get an idea of the overall savings numbers for those courses to see how much money is being saved. In addition to that, for our mini grant projects, we have people do an assessment overview before they apply. So they're able to work out how they'll assess the learning outcomes of their courses using OER. And at the end of their grant, they submit an overview of how things turned out. Do their students like the materials? Has learning changed at all? And if at all, is it for the better or worse? What are changes you might do in the future? Things like that. Megan has a question. Do you have more tips about reaching out to students in early phases without raising unrealistic expectations? That is a good question. The unrealistic expectations is always the hard thing to combat. So what I'll say is, what's worked best for me is having a very clear message when talking to student government. I usually do a talk to them every single fall about what our committee is doing, what we've done in the past, and what we hope to do over the next 2 semesters. That way they have an idea not only of what's been done, but what we will do in the future. And usually at that meeting, I'll get a lot of questions from people about what they can do next or how they can help support us. And having a few examples on hand during that presentation is the best way that I found for really channeling their efforts in a positive direction, rather than making them think that this is going to be going above and beyond their expectations. Rebecca says, how are you measuring success? Partly similar to my response to Kevin is through student savings numbers, but also through number of adoptions. We want to make sure that faculty know we're not just asking them to replace their textbooks, but also to look into ways they could use OER in their classes in other ways. So in some cases, faculty are using open educational resources as study materials for students, or they're adopting open pedagogy where their students create materials with the instructors in a more sort of open learning space where they're able to publish the outcomes of their research or share them with a wider audience afterwards instead of having it be graded and discarded. And you also ask, what has been the most challenging aspect, which is a great question, Rebecca. The most challenging aspect of running a program so far has been being one person who's running a program. I think a lot of the librarians in the audience might be able to empathize, but a lot of the time, this sort of work is being done by a lot of volunteers. My committee is made up of, again, faculty and staff and students who are interested in this, but they're very busy. So when it comes to getting things done, a lot of that falls on them for brainstorming and me for making sure it actually gets done. And I think that's been the most challenging aspect, is figuring out how to use my own time effectively to make sure that we're getting all of this work done and prioritizing the things that I can do with the support that people are able to give me. And finally, Jenny asks, what was your most successful initiative, program, activity, etc.? So far, that has been our grant program, largely because we're very lucky. We have an existing grant program on campus, the Miller Grants, which are faculty development grants to support innovative teaching projects. So when we created our OER grants, then we sort of made them an offshoot of that. It has nothing to do with that original program. We're not getting any of the money from that program, but we borrowed their name to sort of give people an idea of what we wanted to do. So it's telling people through this connection that we want to encourage faculty innovation. We want to encourage more interesting things in the classroom, but they have to be OER projects. So people who might have thought about applying for a larger Miller grant, which are usually between $10,000 and $50,000. It's a lot of funding to get very large projects done, but they wanted to do something smaller, would look to one of our mini grants, which are between $1,000 and $5,000, to do something like integrating open videos into their class rather than having a brand new software they're creating, for example.
Abbey, I was wondering if you could speak to the grant program a little bit. So you award faculty this funding, but do they have sort of like a cohort model that they come together for like support, or is it more individual work on the faculty's end?
It's more individual work. Our first year, it was completely individual work. And then after that, I added a requirement that anyone who received the grant would have to attend a workshop over the summer to talk to me about their project and also to fill out sort of a program timeline workflow worksheet. So what I put together was something where they could look through everything they need to know and be able to assess whether they're actually ready to move forward with their project. So they have to fill out where they want to publish their work, what license they want it to be under, how they're going to assess their program, if they need any help with accessibility, so I can immediately get them in touch with our digital accessibility coordinator. If they want to do peer review, I can handle the peer review process through our digital press. If they want to use our digital press software, all of these things I make sure that they're thinking about before they even get their funding, so that we can make sure they're ready to be supported the second they start their work.
That's great. It looks like we have a couple other questions. Jenny says, sorry if I missed it, but do you mind sharing where the mini grant funding comes from?
Our mini grant funding comes from our library, Center for Learning and Teaching in Provost. Our first year, it was $35,000 from the Provost, $5,000 from the library, and $5,000 from the Center of Learning and Teaching. And every year after that, it's been $10,000 from each group. So the library puts forward $10,000, the Center for Learning and Teaching $10,000, and the Provost $10,000. I know at some other institutions, they have departments pitch in for it, where the library will put in $5,000 and then each college will put in $5,000, because sometimes it's better to have the actual departments chipping in for things that'll go towards their students. But it depends on what sort of support you have available.
We have a question from Megan too. She asks, she says, I've seen statistics from another institution that students in classes with OEM are more successful academically, presumably because they actually have all the materials. Are you seeing any effects like that, or do you have a sense of whether that is happening?
Yes, so that's probably the Georgia study you're thinking of. That's one of the biggest ones. University of Georgia did a study looking at the effects of OER in the exact same course before and after it adopted open textbooks. They saw that there was no change in how well people did, except among Pell Grant students. So students who probably wouldn't have been able to afford the materials originally were doing better in the course. And that's likely because of the access piece rather than the quality of the materials themselves. The materials seem to have the same or equal effects on students if they had their textbooks otherwise. But for those who might not have been able to afford the textbooks, now they can. For us, we've seen pretty much the same. It seems that textbooks and OER are on the same scale when people use them, but it depends incredibly on the instructor as well. So we'll often hear really great things from instructors using OER, but these are also instructors using team-based learning and other innovative techniques in the classroom. So it's not just the OER that's improving the way the students are learning, it's also the teacher putting in the work. And in other cases, we'll have negative outcomes where a professor will say, well, I used this biology textbook and I didn't like it and the students didn't like it and we had a bad time. And after I talked to them about it, I realized they didn't make it clear that students could get a low-cost print version of the textbook. They didn't make it clear that the textbook was linked in their course. And there were other issues at play in the situation that could have been mitigated with some more planning ahead of time.
generally pretty hard to assess efficacy of a learning object or a textbook.
There is a model, but it requires a lot of data. David Wiley put out a model called RISE, which is basically looking at how much the students use a resource and then their outcomes, and then seeing whether the predisposition of the students to do well in the course is affected by their use of the materials or not, whether there's high use, high outcomes, low use, high outcomes, and vice versa, and then figuring out what it's a lot. And it requires, again, the ability to know how many of your students are reading the textbook over time. So it can be done, but yeah.
Another question from Rebecca. Any issue with awards projects now completing? Is there some kind of accountability showing completion?
Yes. Okay. So our very first year of our grant projects, we didn't have enough requirements where we would just say, we want you to do this thing. Here's some funding. That's what a pilot is. You're just learning how to make it work. And there were some issues with making sure that they would share with us the final completed projects, that we know that it's open, that we know that it's out. But every year after that, we've had a great time with it. Instructors have to provide the link to their final resource. We feature them on our OER website. We have basically a short description of what has been created and where to find it. And for any textbook project, it's put out through our digital press so that we can ensure that it's being done on a good platform and follows accessibility guidelines.
Great. Kevin is looking for the link to the OER book, to the workbook. I can do that while.
There you go.
Questions, Abbey. Oops. Anybody have anything else? I'll just grab the link really quick. I'm not finding the right one.
It's okay. I have it up on the screen.
Okay, good.
But all right, any other questions? This has been a great question section, by the way. I'll say I usually try to give at least 20 minutes for questions so we can really get into the meat of people's needs, but it's gone very fast and I love it. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, it's been a lot of questions. It's really great to see. But if we have no more, I think we can go ahead and wrap things up. I'd like to thank everybody for attending. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we'll be posting this video up on our YouTube channel so that you can see it again or share it with others after the session. So with that, I'd like to just say goodbye to everybody and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.